positive. Ooh, that's really long. That's kind of exciting.
That was very exciting. And I don't know how to fix the problem.
Can we hear you in the back?
Good question.
If you turn down the volume, the feedback will go down.
There's no volume is the problem. It's kind of all or nothing.
Yeah.
Can everyone hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Okay. I was joking with students earlier that because the topic is fearlessness, we would first try to frighten them. This wasn't intentional. My idea was more like snakes. Sometimes people visit the Zen Center here in town for the first time, especially people who don't know what it is that they're visiting. So maybe someone comes to fix the dryer, or they come to check the boiler or something. And when they walk in, very often they have the same reaction. They walk in and they say, "Oh, your house smells really good." What is that? And my first reaction always is, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't smell it at all. But we've been in that house now for 3 years, and we burn incense every day. We burn it every morning, and we burn it most evenings. And so the smoke goes into the room, and it goes into the paint and the walls, and it permeates every corner of the house. And when someone enters that space, they say, "Wow, this is really different." But for me, this is just what the world smells like, and I don't notice it at all. Tonight we're going to talk about fearlessness, and I think fear is like this. It so completely permeates our lives, and so completely dominates our decision-making processes that we don't even realize that that's what it is. There's that great line in Jerry Maguire about how dogs and bees can smell fear. But for some reason we can't. If we could, we'd be overwhelmed. Every time you hesitate, that's fear. When you go to the store and you start to buy soap, and then you think, oh, but maybe I really should get this other soap. I'm not sure. That's such a small thing, but it's fear. Every time that you cling to something, say, I hope this stays just like this. When you see someone you haven't seen for a long time, and as you're saying goodbye, you hug them and you hold them. It can be wonderful, but it can also be born of fear. We hold people and we hold moments. And we try to keep them just like this. And every time something happens and you flinch, even in your mind, that's fear. When I was younger, I practiced karate all the time. That was kind of my obsession. And one day, my teacher was using me as the demonstration dummy. He did this a lot. And I was standing like this, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to show everyone something." And then he turned, and very quickly he punched me in the stomach. And I flinched. I said, "Don't flinch." He said, "Yes, sensei." I said, "Let's do it again." He came at me exactly the same way again, except louder and faster. And again, and I flinched. And again, he looked at me and he said, "Don't flinch." Sensei. outside. And every time I flinch, just a little bit, just a tiny bit. I say, don't flinch. And you start getting mad. And then it got worse. And then I got really nervous. And then he's coming at me from all directions. And every time I say, don't flinch. I say, yes, sensei. No. And this went on and on and on. Maybe 20 minutes. He just kept hitting me. And saying, don't flinch. And at the end of that time, I didn't flinch. He could just hit me. He could just hit me. And you could hear this story and you could say, well, he broke you. Maybe. But I learned something really important. Whenever I flinched, I was afraid of how much it was going to hurt. Whenever I flinched, I was afraid that he was going to do something that I wasn't ready for. But after 100 times, I know exactly how much it's going to hurt. After 100 times, I know exactly what it's going to do. And so fear becomes irrelevant. There's no surprise. It doesn't mean that I want him to keep doing it. But there's nothing to be afraid of when you see really clearly what's going on. Fear always is anticipatory. Fear is always us looking to the future or looking to the past. But in this moment, in this actual present moment, it is impossible for you to encounter the thing that you fear. By definition, that thing is in the distance. It's coming. And so you feel this gap. And whenever that arrives, whatever it is, you may feel all sorts of things, but fear will no longer be the point. Because now it's real. It's no longer just the story in your mind. We fear that good things will go away. But we don't have to fear that. Because they will. Every person you know will suffer in their lives. Every person you know will die. It's a fact. More so than taxes. Dreading it has nothing to do with the reality of it. Wherever you are in your life today, it will not be the same a year from now. It will not be the same 2 years from now. And some of you hear me say that and you think, oh, thank goodness. And some of you think, no, because I just got this right. But it will go away. And we fear that bad things will come. And they will. Fearing this is like being afraid of the weather. It doesn't change it at all. We fear that the way things are today will not improve. And what I mean by that is we look around at our lives and we fear that this is all there is. But again, we don't have to fear that. Because right now, in this moment, this is all there is. This is the totality of your life. This is the whole story. And in this moment, there's nothing missing. That doesn't mean that more will come. I think we fear very deeply that we don't know what to do. My mother died last year of multiple sclerosis. And during the last 10 years or so of her life, that process was very difficult. She went from being someone who could walk and drive and do these ordinary things to someone who in the end couldn't do anything for herself. Nothing at all. And there was a long period when she could walk, but barely. She needed to touch the wall. She needed to hold on to something. She could walk with a grocery cart, for example, very slowly. And then it was okay. She could drive, but she shouldn't drive. And she wanted to keep that freedom, or that sense of freedom. She didn't want to be in a wheelchair. And my father confessed to me one time, he said, I have these dreams, and I wonder if I'm a bad person. I have these dreams, I'm with your mom, and we're in Paris, and we're looking around, but she's in a wheelchair, and I'm pushing her, and I'm so happy. Because I know what to do. Because I know how to help her. I can help her by pushing. He said, but right now I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help. And it made him feel so lost. We all have something like that. And perhaps even more than that, and this is just my feeling, I think in a very deep way, we also fear that we do know exactly what to do, and that we're not doing it. We feel paralyzed in the face of the potential of our lives. And so we make little excuses and we tell ourselves, no, I haven't really found my purpose. I'm not really sure what to do. And yet there's that voice that says, yes, you do. That can be terrifying. Fearlessness does not look like what we imagine. It's not so heroic. It's not marked by big acts of bravery. It's not Braveheart. It's something else. It's not, for example, my son is 1 year old. He's fearless. But that's not the fearlessness we're talking about. That's a deep, deep ignorance about consequences. And so if I put him at the edge of a 30-foot cliff, he would jump off, laughing the whole time. Have no idea. I don't want to encourage that. Fearlessness, by definition, is the absence of fear. And so, in true fearlessness, the issue of fearlessness does not arise. If we imitate fearlessness, if we imagine, oh, fearlessness looks like this, we're missing the point. Because all we're thinking about is fear. Fearlessness isn't concerned with what I'm talking about tonight. at all. It's not an issue. There's a really interesting teaching in the Buddhist world about generosity. It states that there are four. That there are four kinds of generosity that we can practice. And the first is more or less what we imagine generosity to be. It's something quantifiable. We share resources. Maybe we share our money. Maybe we share food. Maybe we share time. Maybe we give our energy to someone and we help them move that heavy thing. This is very important. And what this teaching says is that if you practice that kind of generosity, even if you kind of force yourself to do it, even if it doesn't feel natural to you, you know, we'll do something generous and then we'll say, but I'm not a generous person. That doesn't mean anything. In the moment of the act of generosity, you are generosity. And your story about whether that fits the rest of your life or not is really separate. So you can fake it if you want. You give something. Some little thing to someone. And what this teaching says is that in doing that, you're opening yourself up to the second level of generosity, which is protection. To protect someone. To protect something. To protect an idea. This goes beyond giving something away. Because now we're including something in our idea of our responsibility. When you see a can on the street, you pick it up and you put it in the garbage. It's such a small thing. On one level, we can say, well, it's just a gift to the person who would have had to do that anyway. But it's probably also an act of protection. So you understand, you're playing into a larger process by making this small gesture. And you do it, and then the next day you do it again. And then the next day you do it again. It's not so complicated. But this idea of generosity is expanding. I'm going to skip number 3 to tell you number 4 is what we call transmission of the Dharma. It's making a teaching of your life. It's offering something that's much bigger than what we can describe. And I skipped number 3 because that's where I want to spend my time. Because number 3, we say, is fearlessness. That's the generosity. And so you give something. And in giving something, you realize that you can afford to give something. And then you protect. And in the act of protecting, you realize that you have more room than you thought. And as you start to let go of this idea of what is mine and what I have to protect, you find that all of this anticipation is really useless. start to reside in this place where fear is not relevant. And so fearlessness becomes just another name for nothing left to lose. The other classical Buddhist teaching, I think, that speaks directly to this is what we call the First Noble Truth. Everyone, if you took a high school Buddhism class, you had to learn the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, and it was probably the only thing they taught you. And the first one was that all life is suffering, which just sounds so depressing. But this word suffering is a translation of what we call dukkha. And dukkha is actually much more subtle and much broader than the idea of suffering. It speaks to a kind of dissatisfaction, a feeling that something is not right. And what the Buddha said was, we always feel this a little bit. In our worst moments, we see it clearly, and in our best moments, we don't see it at all, because what we're saying is, I wish it was like this all the time. But we can just as easily translate dukkha as fear. And say that this first teaching is that our lives are characterized constantly by fear. Anytime we feel that something is missing, it creates in the tiniest way this anxiety. If I feel that I am missing something, that's fear. And again, when I look around at my life and I say, is this the whole thing? That's a kind of fear. I don't want my story to end here. I don't want to be done. I don't think that I'm fully cooked. Not yet. I don't think that my life is fully cooked. I'm on chapter 9. But chapter 12 is great. Huge things happen. And everything I've been doing has been building toward that. And if you would just let me get to chapter 10, it would be obvious where I'm going with this. But when I'm on this word on the page, that's the last word of the book for me in that moment. So we have this teaching that's suggesting that fearlessness is itself a kind of generosity. That fearlessness is a kind of offering. But I want to clarify, it's not an offering because it makes us feel so confident about giving stuff away. Fearlessness is generosity because fearlessness demonstrates that fearlessness is possible. If you had never seen a unicycle before, if it was a completely foreign object to you, and I brought one out and I said, people ride this, they ride it around, and if they're really good, they juggle. You would say, no they don't. That is impossible. There's no chance. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And if we left it at that, you could go your whole life. You could say, I went to this Buddhist talk and he brought out this prop, and it made no sense. But then if you went to the circus and you saw someone doing it, the moment you saw that person, it would change everything. It doesn't mean that you know how to do it. But suddenly you know it's possible. There's no question. Someone can ride that thing. And if someone else can ride that thing, well, maybe I don't know how they got there, but maybe I can ride that. Even if I don't want to, even if it seems totally beyond me, I can be kind of inspired. It's really amazing. And in the same way, when you witness fearlessness, when you see someone who moves in the world not guided by fear, it is so rare and so remarkable that even if you don't know how to live that way yourself, you might feel a little inspired. You might feel a sense that you can do something you didn't know you could do. And what happens is when we see it, it inspires us to practice that first level of generosity. And so we share ourselves. And we protect those around us. I remember so well being a kid and going to see one of the Rocky movies in the movie theater. You know, even if he doesn't win, he wins. He works so hard, and the music is playing, I remember going out to the parking lot with my dad, and he's just going to the car, he's in the car, and I'm, you know, kind of feeling like I have this strength that I wasn't aware of. I was like a little tiny boy. But we absorb that very quickly. We recognize it very quickly, and we can take it on. And if we can keep that, it moves us. I think other people in the parking lot were doing the same thing, even if just in their minds. We have this opportunity to give in every moment. Even if there's nothing in front of me to offer you, I can offer you what I'm doing. I can offer you the action that I'm performing. I can offer you this moment. I can say, here, I'm doing this for you. This is the choice that we're offered in this practice. Do we pay attention? Do we notice what's really happening here? And do we share it? The most that I can offer you is everything I have. That's obvious. What's not so obvious to us is knowing what we have. That requires us to see through what we usually see. There are stories called the Jataka tale. They're very interesting. These are stories that are intended to illustrate the lives of Buddha before the Buddha was the Buddha. So you have to take a little mental leap into the world of reincarnation. But they're fun stories. That's okay. And the idea is that even before the Buddha was the Buddha, that he was cultivating these generosities in all of these lives. And he had a lot of opportunities because a lot of these lives were short. And I'll give you an illustration of why. In one story, he's walking through the woods as a young man, and he comes across a tiger, a mother, a tigress, who is starving to death. And she has 3 tiger cubs with her. And they don't have any milk. And so they're also starving. And according to this story, he sees the situation, he sees the baby tigers, and he pulls out a knife, and he opens himself up and he offers himself to the mother. And she eats him. It's very straightforward. But in this story, in this very quick story, we have all 4 generosities. He just offered himself. He offered his body. That's 1. And he protected his babies. That's 2. And he did it in an act of fearlessness. That's 3. And all of this became a teaching of something much bigger. And that's 4. The smallest act of generosity can be an act of fearlessness. And an act of fearlessness can go so far beyond anything that we can express. And so fearlessness becomes the pivot point. It's there that we can place our attention. There's another teaching, and I heard this more in the Tibetan world than in the Zen world, but I like this very much. And for whatever reason, it always seems to be breakfast, but it could be anything. That they say you should eat your breakfast as if you're being chased by 3 tigers. That doesn't mean eat it really quickly. It also doesn't mean eat it in fear. It means do what you have to do right now. The intensity of your life is the intensity of death rushing at you right now. The 3 tigers are running at you right now. And they're going to catch you. We say 3, I think, because if we said just 1, you might think of ways out. You might think, well, I can get away from 1 tiger. Probably kidding yourself, but we'd entertain the idea. And 2, I don't know, maybe you think, well, I'll play them against each other. But when you're eating your breakfast and you look down the street and you see 3 tigers coming at you, you know. They're going to win. So how do you eat your breakfast? How do you put on your clothes? How do you walk to the car? Knowing that this is your chance to do that thing. Because whatever is coming for you is coming. Nothing's going to change that. we hear these stories of mothers lifting cars off of babies to rescue them. This is not an act of fear. Fear is exactly the thing that would prevent someone from being able to do that. Fear paralyzes us. Fear takes us out of where we are and puts us in where we think we're going to be, where we don't know what to do. This act of strength, this act of superhuman strength, can't come from fear. It comes from knowing what to do in that moment. In this tradition, we recommend that people do what we call zazen, kind of meditation. And I think one thing we discover when we sit down and we do zazen for the first time is that we're just breathing fear. We sit down and we face a wall, and there's nothing else there. And it's a very safe room. And we start to think about all the things we've done wrong. And we start to think about all the things that we can't control. And we start to think about how we want to be someone else. We say, well, I'm doing this because I want to be a different kind of person. Why do I want to be that different kind of person? Because the person I am right now isn't good enough. There's something missing. But maybe I can chase that thing. And so I'll do this. And we sit and we breathe. And we sit and we breathe. And there's fear going by. And we do this for a while. And we do this every day. And every once in a while, that fear moves out of our community. And it stops being the dominant scene. And then it comes back. But even in our own minds, we have that moment now when it slips away. And we realize that already, right now, in this moment, there is a part of my mind that is without fear. A part of my mind for which fear has no relevance. And as soon as we see it, we know something that we can never get rid of. We can slow down like this all the time. We can sit at a stoplight and we can take a breath. And we can really look and we can really notice and we can see that fear is our story. But that the canvas is much bigger than that. There's something in the margins that goes beyond what we think is so central. So what do we do? that's a mistake. Because as soon as you imagine that you need to cultivate it, you step into the idea that it is not already present and already available. Fearlessness is not something we make. It's a place from which we can act. And so we notice moment to moment. And we give. Not fearlessness, but our time, and our energy, and ourselves. And we let people in. And we expand the scope of what we can do. And along the way, while we're giving these little things, we might accidentally be giving something much, much greater. So great that it can't be quantified and that it can't be expressed. And we look at our lives and we see ourselves on this map with this huge red arrow that's pointing and saying, "You are here." And we know that that's enough. And we know that that's the only place we can ever be. And we know that what we're doing here is the only thing that we can do. I'm going to stop there. If anyone would like to jump in with any questions or any comments, it doesn't have to be about this. This is our opportunity to talk about a lot of things. Yes. Let's hope this microphone isn't so dangerous.
I guess I heard you mention that you think that fearlessness is very rare in the world, I guess, these days. And I think you're right. But I don't think it's as rare as a lot of people are thinking when you say that it's rare. I think that fearlessness is pretty common also.
Well, and thank you for saying that, because I don't want to be misleading. Part of what I want to say here, maybe all of what I want to say here, is that it's always here. It's always functioning. But we don't see it so much. We don't recognize it in ourselves, which is the big problem. And I think that when we do recognize it in someone else, it can be quite shocking. But I agree with you. I think it's all around. It's just the thing that we're missing. Yes?
How does fearlessness relate to the concept of impermanence, the fear of impermanence? We won't accept it.
The question is how does fearlessness relate to impermanence and the fear of impermanence? establish that first of all. This is Buddhism 101. That all things are impermanent. This is one of when you come to Buddhism, you get nothing but bad news in the beginning. We say, you know that feeling you have that things aren't so great? You always have that feeling, and you're always going to be dealing with that feeling. And then we say, oh, and by the way, nothing's going to last ever. But I think there's tremendous freedom in that. I think that teaching is speaking directly to the idea that our fear of things changing is, by definition, delusion. It will change. It's like my teacher hitting me over and over again. At some point, it becomes a certainty. He will hit me. At which point, fear dissolves. And when we recognize that everything will change, when we recognize that everything is impermanent, we realize that there's nothing to fear about that, because it's an absolute. We look at the person across from us, we look at our partner, we look at the relationship that we're in, and we say, oh, I hope you never change. And there's so much fear there. Because right now, as you are, you love me. And right now, as you are, I like you too. That could change. So it's, oh, let's not tamper with this. And if you read a lot of love poems, right, a lot of sonnets, it all has to do with everything changing but this one thing. This relationship won't change, right? The mountains will crumble, but we'll be the same. But we won't. Not even tomorrow. That relationship is always changing, because I'm always changing, because you're always changing. And your chances of being skillful in that relationship, working from the premise that it will not change, those chances are zero. But when you face a relationship, when you face a circumstance, when you look at your life and you say, absolutely, this moment is the only moment that will be this moment, then you know what to do. You do your best. And then in the next moment, you find that you're in a new world altogether. And so you do your best in that moment. And if you commit to a relationship, then you wake up the next day next to someone and you say, hello, it's nice to meet you. Let's do our best and see how this goes. But I think the more deeply we recognize that, the more obvious it is that we carry fear as something extra. That fear is a fiction. Yes?
I was talking to a friend earlier today, and we were talking about a math class, and how a lot of times you don't want to ask a question in math class because you're sure that everybody else knows the answer, and you fear you're looking stupid. So instead of asking that question and really putting yourself out there, you kind of close yourself off so that you have to take actions later. In fact, we both recognize that we both let that fear take us over. And then we talked about ways of getting around it outside of the classroom. Yeah, I just study more outside the classroom, and I write the question down. So something that I find very ironic is when I wanted to post this comment, I was like, I don't know, it's not very profound. You're going to sound dumb.
So, if you couldn't hear in the back, we're speaking to, and I teach at the university, so I know this is true, that students have questions, but they don't ask the question because they're afraid that they're the only person who has that question, that everybody else knows the answer, and they're going to look stupid. And then they ask the question, and everybody turns to them and says, thank you for asking that question. I didn't know. Sometimes someone will ask me a question in class, and someone else will say, "Oh, I've wondered that forever." Why? But we are so concerned about how we are perceived. I think one of the things that we really struggle with as teenagers is we feel the weight of that. And one of the ways in which people rebel at a particular age is to say, "I don't care what you think about me." But of course we protest too much. We care very deeply what other people think. But in that moment what we want to show is I want you to think of me as someone who doesn't care. I want you to think of me as an autonomous person. I want you to think of me as someone who has some power of his own. And then we move beyond that and it becomes more subtle, but it never changes. I think, well, I hope that people heard that the right way. I don't want to say this because people will misunderstand that. We always think that people won't possibly understand what we mean. No one could possibly get the contents of my thoughts. So we save them the trouble of sifting through it. And so we don't really put ourselves out there. To move in the world in a way that is not concerned with how people perceive you is, again, I think, very rare and a very powerful stance.
I think a way, does someone else have a question?
Is it okay?
Sure.
Okay.
I think a way out of that is just to say what other people think of me is none of my business. I mean, it can be important to them, like what they think can be important to them, but it's just what they think is not my business.
It's beyond your control.
So it's not my business.
Yes.
What I was going to say is, I think a lot of people are concerned right now about the future and limited resources. People hear all this stuff about 2012 and all this, yeah, and all these changes in the world. How does this relate to what you're talking about?
Well, yes, it's true. I think that we live in a climate of fear. And of course, it's not just because the economy is bad, right? Though that's one of the stories that we're told all the time. And it's not just because there's this political situation in a different part of the world or whatever that is. It's that people want you to feel fear. We should just acknowledge that and move on. People around you want you to be afraid. If you weren't afraid, you wouldn't buy their products. Right?
It's almost like those things want to make you believe that they are who you are. And it's like, but we're not money, we're not those politics. None of that is us.
Well, and there's nothing missing. My life, with or without Tide, is complete. My life in this moment is completely my life. It's not 98% and 2% is Tide. But Tide wants me to believe that very deeply, right? And so I'm told, and my apologies to Tide because they're not nearly the worst about this, but that something is missing in my life. And that something that's missing creates a sense of anxiety. And then I go to the store and I think, well, I could get the cheap one, but I saw the commercial with the blood stain and the Tide. I'm probably living my life at a level that requires the power of Tide. And so suddenly I'm living my life according to a narrative that's been fed to me. And that is the ultimate example of living in fear. And these other things, the economy, it can be very unsettling. But what we're reminded of at a time like this is that we never know what's happening tomorrow. It's just that right now, we're actually being reminded of it on the news. But that's no different from 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 100 years ago. You don't know what your life will be when you wake up tomorrow. You don't know if you will find yourself in abundance, or if you'll be missing things that are essential. And so again, you live 100% in the reality that you have. And the reality that you have is this one. Your hand goes up.
Yeah, I'm still a little confused about, now when you were talking about fearlessness, it's not, you don't want to focus on fear. And I'm reminded of the saying that we want to focus on the solution, not the problem. So I'm still confused. What do we do instead then? Is that the generosity? And can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. There are two ways to talk about this. One has to do with living in the present. Because as I was saying, in the present, fear cannot actually exist. Not really. If you're really looking at the present, you won't find any fear there. But if you look to 1 second after the present, fear might arise. Because who knows what will happen then? And so on and so on and so on. And so one of our difficulties is realizing where we are. Understanding that where I am is not a location relative to all the things that are going to happen. Where I am is a location relative to this moment. And in this moment, what I'm doing is my whole life. Fear won't help me. And I can see over and over again that when I'm afraid, I don't see clearly. And when I'm afraid, I don't act skillfully. Because fear paralyzes. And the consequence of fear is it makes the next moment just like the one before it. Because the defining aspect becomes that idea instead of the reality of what I'm doing. And so I pay attention. That's one. But then according to this teaching about generosity, there's a way to sneak up on fearlessness. And again, if the goal is fearlessness, then we're kind of missing the point. It just means we're afraid that we're not fearless enough. But what this teaching says is that letting go is the way beyond fear. We learn in the Four Noble Truths that all of life is this dukkha, this fear. And that the way beyond that is to let go of attachment. That attachment is the problem. Attachment to outcomes. Attachment to things being the way they should be instead of the way they are. But how do we let go of that attachment? The only way to let go of attachment is to let go of the fear of letting go, which is what keeps us there. And what this teaching about generosity says is, instead of letting go of that, which becomes a very kind of self-focused endeavor, just let go of something. Let go of something that you think you need to hold on to. And so when someone says, could you drive me to the airport? And you say, oh, but it's at 2:30 in the morning. Because every flight out of Anchorage is at 2:30. Instead, you say, okay, I can afford that. I can give you that. And you give that. And when you give that, you find you had a little more to give than you thought. And you find that letting go of that didn't result in loss. And so first you just give. And then this teaching says that protection is another step in this. We imagine that we live in this little box, and we have our little walls, and we keep it very safe. In order to protect someone, though, we have to invite them in. And so we take a little responsibility for someone else. I remember as a child being so impressed with these commercials with Sally Struthers. Some of you know who Sally Struthers is. And I don't even remember the name of that particular program, but where you would adopt a foster child in another country, and you send $10 a month, and that helps pay for that child's education, and that child's health care and those things, and you receive a picture, right? It's always kind of the same package. And I remember as a child watching these commercials and thinking how incredible it was that someone somewhere was watching that commercial and picking up the phone and calling and saying, sure, I'll do that. I will make a commitment, probably a multiple-year commitment, to spend money on a person I will never meet, because I trust what you're telling me, that this person needs my help and that I can help. It's huge. And that's such an obvious one, but we can do it in so many little ways. You don't throw your garbage out the window because there's this environment to protect. And there are things you don't say to your family members because you know that they'll tear the family apart. And so you have them to protect. And maybe you volunteer to be a crossing guard. So all these little people to protect. And as you're doing this, and as you're sharing your time, and as you're opening up your world, you're forgetting the things that you think are going to be taken away. And that fearlessness is just starting to show itself. After all that mess is kind of cleared. That's how we sneak up on it. Yes?
I'd like to go back to your comments on impermanence.
Yes.
Do you mean nothing is permanent? Seems clear. Do you mean is it more the nature of things are uncertain, or that there is? Because listening to you, I would see in you that there are fundamental parts of you that will not change.
For example?
Your core beliefs.
But they have changed. They are not what they were before. And I can only hope, because I know, for example, what an idiot I was when I was 18 years old, that my 60-year-old self might look back at myself now and say, oh, that guy was so dumb. That I will have progressed a little bit. But I think that this teaching is very clear, and it can be kind of disarmingly straightforward. That there is absolutely nothing that will not change. We talk about things that are compounded, they're made of components. And there's the example that's used often in the literature is a knife. I don't know why. But when you look at a knife, there are things that you know about a knife, and one of them is it wasn't always a knife. And so it's not permanent. Permanence goes both ways. For something to be permanent, it has to have always been that way. And then we look at it and we say, well, not only was it not always a knife, but it's made of components, it's made of parts. There's a handle, and there's a blade. We know it can be broken down. It doesn't even exist as itself. It's a collection of things that I call a knife today, because right now they're all together. And then I also know, just through inductive reasoning, and because I go hiking and I see these signs on the side of the trail that say how long it takes for an orange peel to disappear and how long it takes for a piece of paper, you know, that kind of thing, to biodegrade. I also know that this knife will not always be a knife. Now, it may change over time, it may be melted down, it may be all sorts of things, but in fact, I could just start using it as a screwdriver. Yes?
But if you take that further,
Yes.
then you would have to say that it's possible that in the future you would no longer hold the beliefs you hold today.
Absolutely.
And perhaps not be a Buddhist.
Absolutely. For me to assert anything other than that would be total delusion. For me to imagine that I know exactly who I would be 10 years from now, all I can know is my trajectory. I had a friend in high school. I only knew her for a few years. I knew she was my brother's friend's sister. And I would bump into her sometimes, or sometimes we all got rides home together. One day she had an aneurysm, and she didn't remember her own family. She didn't know anything from before, and her personality completely changed. That's the most dramatic example. But her sense of humor changed. Her relationships changed. Everything changed. And the day before, no one would ever have said that that was possible. The day before, if you talked about change, they might have said, well, she doesn't like broccoli, but maybe she hasn't tried it in the right context yet. And maybe today's the day. That would be the level of change you might imagine. But in fact, she woke up the next day, and she was a person that none of us had ever met before. On that continuum, there are all sorts of degrees. But I feel I can say with some confidence that none of you will be the same person that you are right now, 5 minutes from now. And then 10 years from now, you'll really feel it.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the fearlessness that you're talking about, is this something similar to just accepting the fact that life is just full of good and bad, and it's going to be just a common balance throughout your entire life?
In case everyone couldn't hear that, the question is this really talking about the idea that there's a balance of good and bad in your life? That everything will even out? Is that what you're asking?
Sure.
No. And I say no because I think I can't promise anyone that it's going to even out. Some people's lives are terrible. Really bad. From my perspective, from an outside perspective. You say, well, they just keep seeing, they get hit over and over again. Right? Some people seem to get a whole lot of stuff to deal with. And some people, they don't. Some people seem to be very happy people regardless of what happens. Some people, a lot of people, seem to be very unhappy regardless of what happens. And study after study shows that getting what you want never has anything to do with becoming happier. Right? That if you, as long as you're above the poverty line, the income has nothing to do with happiness. So I can't tell you that it's going to even out. I think what I want to say is that whether you think that what's happening now is good, or whether you think that what's happening now is bad, that this is reality. Not the way that you think it's supposed to be. We imagine that our lives are hiding around the corner from us. it really should be more like this. Or once I get all my stuff in order, it'll be more like this, and then that'll be my real life. But right now, there are just a few things that need to be fixed. Or there are a few things that are kind of off. When we say that, we're saying that all of reality is broken. And what we're saying is that something went wrong. Because there's an alternate reality where everything is okay. We really believe that in a way. We might not describe it that way. But the fact is that we measure our lives against a life that we're not living. And so we give tremendous power to that life. This teaching is about saying, forget that one. I hate to say embrace. I think embrace gives the wrong idea. I don't want to say embrace your life. I want to say live your life. Don't hold back. Don't hesitate. Don't flinch given the life that you've been given. Don't wait for the moment to be a little bit better. Don't wait for your life to be right. This is it. Whether you think this is good or bad is really secondary. As long as you're focusing on the life you're not living, you're not here. And as long as you're not here, again, your chances of being skillful here are none. Yes?
Can Tonglen play a role in fearlessness? Like
Yes.
the method of Tonglen?
Yes.
Okay.
Would you like to say something about Tonglen?
Well, it's going on neither of Tonglen there, especially inside of stuff.
What is
Tonglen?
It's, okay. And I preface this by saying I am not in any way a representative of that practice or that tradition, so I'm not, I hope I don't misrepresent. I'm going to try and say it in the simplest possible terms. But my very primitive understanding of Tonglen practice is, among other things, that you're taking on other people's suffering and you're offering them the opposite. And so you might start this practice, and again, this is just the way I've heard this. You might start this practice with someone that actually you care about very deeply, that you have very positive feelings for. You know, you might choose your mother, or you might choose a good friend, or you might choose your child. Someone for whom compassion seems very easy. But you can see their suffering, or you can see their confusion, and in this practice, you actually try to take it into yourself. And then when you breathe out, what you breathe out is something else. So if they're feeling confusion, then you breathe out clarity. And then it can get harder. You know, you can start to take on a subject that's not so easy for you, maybe. Or you could take on a group. But this is a wonderful practice because it breaks down this idea of what is mine. It is a generosity. It's like going to the gym to flex the muscle of generosity. Right? You absorb and you give away, and you give away, and you give away everything. And what you find every time, I hope, is that now you have more to give away. And now you have more to give away. That kind of expansion does speak directly to this. Because in doing that, you find that this, whatever it is, whatever that feeling is that makes you contract, is actually the opposite of what we want to do. It's a beautiful practice. I thought I saw it in the back. Yes.
You say that fearlessness is possibly not the bumper sticker, no fear, but if you are aware of fear, even yourself coming up either as an emotion or a fiction, could the generosity then be that you
question, again, because I think we really have a microphone problem, is the reference was to the Nike slogan, "No fear." The t-shirts say, "No fear." And of course, the irony is that you're plastering the word fear on your body. But the question was, instead of this idea of no fear, of kind of pushing that out, could it be that simply the awareness of fear, the recognition of fear for what it is an act of generosity? Is that correct? I haven't heard it phrased that way, but I think certainly yes. You know, one hopes in talking about all this that trying to move beyond fear does not become a way to fixate on fear. Right? But I would also say that I think it's very natural in spiritual practice that at the beginning of anything that there is a very self-conscious stage. And that maybe in thinking about fear and dealing with fear, maybe for a while we give it some real attention. So that we can know what it really looks like. One of the things when people hear this first noble truth, that all of life is dukkha, that all of life is this feeling, this gap, this sense that something is wrong. Occasionally people hear that and they think, oh yeah, that's true. But very often people think, that's kind of an exaggeration, don't you think? I don't always feel that way. And then they think of the times that they do feel that way and they say, well, the rest of the time is not that. And what that teaching asks you to do is to look a little bit deeper. And ask really deeply, have you ever felt not just that everything is okay right now, but that everything, pause for a moment to think what everything means, is okay. If the answer is no, then that teaching is correct. But it invites us to look at the way we view the world, at this lens. So much of Buddhist teaching is pointing to the idea that we may be looking at things, we may see what's in front of us, but we don't, there's a shadow. And so in order to take that lens of fear away, I think it is important. And I think it does become a kind of act of generosity because of that intention. I think it's important for us to just look directly at it and say, you know what, this is fear too. And this is fear too. Not so that we suddenly explode, in a panic and say, oh my gosh, I'm even more afraid than I thought. I should stay home. But to start to notice that this is what our world smells like. And it doesn't have to smell like that for everyone. You can step out. I talked about the smell of the incense in our house. Whenever I go on vacation, I come back, I get just a tiny whiff. Just for a second, I open the doors, and then I start putting things away and then it's gone. And I forget it and I get used to it again. But there's that moment where I think, this is what people smell when they walk in. That's really beautiful. I think we have time for one more question. Maybe we can do it.
I've heard you make a very strong, eloquent case for fearlessness, and we can see the wisdom in that. What I haven't heard you say is that there might also be a case could be made also for a little bit of fear being good also.
Mm. I'm assuming you want me to make that case.
No, I was just thinking it might be more balanced
but there you said the way I would want to say it. I think there's a great, great difference between recognizing consequences and then establishing a relationship of fear to those consequences. I think we feel fear because we don't really know what the consequences are. If I know exactly what's going to happen when I do this, what I feel in relationship to that is not exactly fear. It's just a decision point. Do I want to do that or not? But there's an unknown. And that unknown brings me to fear. Of course, there are times when we can't know the consequences, but then we can't. And the way this is phrased sometimes, and this is not at all limited to Buddhism, though I've heard it said in Buddhist texts as well, you look at any problem you have, ask yourself, can I do something about it or not? If you can, there's no reason to be afraid. Just do something about it. If you can't, well, there's no reason to be afraid. Because there's nothing you can do about it. Fear is where we put ourselves in the middle. And we don't know what to do. And so, even though for a very small child, of course, you instill, and something we exaggerate to little kids, I think that's reasonable. They're very interesting. Now I'm really interested. I'm reading parenting things all the time. And sometimes they'll say, for example, don't tell a child not to step in front of a car because they might die. Because a child has no concept of dying, right? Tell them that it'll hurt really, really badly, right? Because a kid can like, oh, that would be terrible. And so we create this sense of consequence, right? And as a tiny mind, consequence is going to be associated with fear. And I can say that safely because I'm saying that that's the case for everybody. Right? That fear is something we carry around all the time. But in order to move skillfully in the world, and that's always the central question, at least of Buddhism, not about whether something is right or wrong, but about whether we're moving skillfully. That skillfulness comes from the clarity of knowing where you are and where you're going. It doesn't come from this additional emotional relationship of thinking, what if, what if, what if, what if, what if. That's my feeling about it. I saw your hand up. Yes.
Thanks. I've been encountering this very interesting question because what I've been doing involves a lot of self-recognition. I do a lot of self-portrait as well. So, and I always, unconsciously, my personal preference is I always like to title my own self-portrait with a third person or something, she, he, something like that. And then one of my instructors actually, very respect. And then he asked me this very simple question: why not just use I? First person instead of third person. And I couldn't answer it when he asked me that. But later on, I gave a lot of thought to it. I don't know how that relates to Buddhism, but to me, it's like if I put this I to this third person, I'm facing myself, and I look at myself more objectively, rather subjectively. I have maybe what you call, I feel more fearless. Is that how you say it? That's how I sense it. I mean, it's not so, it's a question. It's just, I need your kind of a guidance to see if there's something wrong.
So, and we'll have to make this the last question. This is really interesting. So Rachel is an artist here in town, and she does a lot of self-portraits. And the question is sometimes, is that you title the self-portraits as she something something.
Yeah, third person.
Or her something, right?
Yeah,
It's not I,
never
it's not my whatever.
you sound really like nothing. You're talking about something that's have nothing to do with you. And that really bothers me. And then I was like, I was so happy when I was even more happy. I was like, that answered the professor's question, why I never put this, why I used third person instead of I. So I just, do this connection to you, help me connect them together.
I can promise I've never been asked this question before. But this is what comes to mind. And take this for what it's worth. But you're saying you have a way of doing this that makes you feel fearless. And that makes me hear that there's another way of doing it that makes you feel fearful. That makes me think you should do it that way. And you should confront that directly. Because fearlessness can't be an imitation of fearlessness. If there's something that scares you, then that's your object. And I think you have to look it in the face. I think that's what this is speaking to. And then we have to stop. Thank you so much for coming tonight. It's really an honor for me to be able to speak with all of you. I would like to be able to speak with each of you. Please do take pamphlets if you like. Our goal here is not to, drag you all into the ACC. Quite the opposite. It's just kind of a nice way to get to meet with all of you. But I will make one plug, which is that we have one more talk again, and that'll be on April 1st, on April Fool's Day, which means I'm planning all sorts of things. It's easy to remember. And we'll be talking about action. And even saying the word gets me excited because it's so central. And there's so much to say about it. And I've been looking forward to that talk for a long time. So if you can come on April 1st, and really, what else do you have to do on April Fool's Day? Please do. It'll be a Thursday evening again. So I hope to see you there, and I hope to see you around town. Take care.
Thank you.